Hi there. So I'm starting this one out a little bit differently. We had a little mic issue in the first couple minutes of the Fireside chat recording, so I'm going to intro Liz this way. So I had the pleasure today of doing a Fireside chat with Liz Rice from Aqua Security. If you haven't checked out Aqua Security, you really should. They're doing some pretty cool stuff in the container security space, especially with Kubernetes. So I'll introduce Liz, just set the background on Liz. So Liz is a technology evangelist with Aqua Security. At the core, she's known as a software engineer. She enjoys building products an awful lot, but she also loves writing code. She's participated in a few startups, both successful and ones that have failed. Co-chair of the KubeCon and Cloud Native events this year and coming up. Focuses on making things easy to digest for technical people and helping people understand container security. She also looks after some open source projects, KubeBench and the Manifesto project. I found out she actually worked with Skype and on the product very early in the days. She's an award-winning speaker, and she's actually worked on satellites, believe it or not. So this was a really cool fireside chat for me. Back in June, I was able to do a fireside chat in Toronto with Kelsey Hightower from Google. You can check that out on our website. I posted the fireside chat a little while ago. But it was cool to be able to round out the other side of the co-chair of the CNCF and all the stuff that they're doing in the space. So I hope you enjoy the fireside chat, and we look forward to getting Liz back in Toronto to meet with some of our customers and share her knowledge and her thought leadership. So I did this to Kelsey too, so we're going to do it to you. We got a couple icebreaker questions, so just quick answers, fast on your feet.
Okay.
We kind of have to answer honestly when we're putting you under that kind of pressure. So favorite Linux distro?
Ubuntu.
Oh. VI, Vim, or Emacs?
Vim, yeah.
And
well, actually, I would say Vibe.
Yeah.
I would kind of say Vibe.
Everybody,
I'm old enough.
all the old schooler hardcores are like it. I know the answer to this one, but Go or Python?
Go these days.
I figured
yeah.
that. And are you YAML or JSON?
I think maybe YAML now. Yeah, it's frightening to think that, but I think I've kind of grown to like being able to comment things out. So.
And then people get into
Is it YAML or YAML?
Well, let's not go that far. What's your favorite container registry to work with?
I almost always end up using Docker Hub just because it's there. But
and then you fix the images, redo the Docker file. What's your favorite technology book?
Favorite technology book? Am I allowed to plug my own?
Of course. Kelsey did that too.
Literally about a week ago, a book on Kubernetes security that I wrote with Michael Hazelbass, and just published it. So it's actually currently available online through the Aqua site, and then in the future it will be available in physical copies as well.
Cool. So check out the book.
So what's the title of the book?
Kubernetes security.
That's it.
Yeah.
And what about podcasts? Any podcasts you listen to keep up to speed and that people should be checking out?
Oh, in the kind of tech world, you mean? Like not Serial?
Well, yeah, not Serial.
Okay. I actually really like Go Time, which is a Go community one, and I can't remember what they call it. Do they call it Kubernetes podcast? The one that Craig Fox Google does. That's good.
Cool. And are you a window or an aisle seat person? I'm sure you do lots of
aisle seat. Very strongly aisle seat.
All right.
Because I get up and I'm like the annoying person who's constantly walking up and down the aisle because I don't want to sit still for 8 hours.
So I'm the opposite. I just put my head against the wall and sleep if I can. So there you go. We get along good in the room. Cool. So let's talk a little bit about open source. So Arctiq's kind of an open source company. We choose open source first as much as possible. I grew up kind of in the Apache Software Foundation, so that to me was one of the big first foundations that really did well with open source. The HTTP came out of that, lots of things. And now it's the CNCF, and you're obviously involved in the CNCF greatly. You had a busy schedule this year and lots of responsibility on stage talking about things. So how do you see the CNCF and their influence on open source, and also how that relates to enterprise? Because enterprises, a lot of them are open source first now too. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think over the last, kind of going to answer that in reverse order. So over the last maybe 6 months, we've seen a really big increase in end users in the CNCF, and I think that's reflecting how much enterprises are embracing this technology. And you know, we've gone from maybe a year or 18 months ago, people maybe they're starting to use Kubernetes a little bit in production. Now there's, you know, some really big companies, and then they might not have moved everything into cloud native in production, but they've started that journey and they're prepared to come on stage and talk about it, which is fantastic.
And the community side of that, how do you see people getting involved? So they might have a job with an enterprise customer, but they tend to the concept of learning all the time is under so much, people under pressure. How do you see them getting involved in that community? Is it more from a work perspective or a personal perspective from a learning side?
So the CNCF actually just appointed a new, I think her job title is Director for End User Ecosystem. So I think that goes to show how much they're kind of taking that seriously, that they want to find good ways of engaging the end user community and helping them, you know, get educated and figure out at what level they might want to contribute. You know, not every enterprise wants to contribute to the core code, but maybe they're contributing with their experiences and their learnings. So I think that's probably what they'll be encouraging.
Cool. And we talked a little bit about some of the open source projects that you work on from a security perspective. What role do you see for those projects in the security space? It's not a traditional thing. We see security companies open sourcing things, so it's starting to change. It's nice. Do you think that will change much as far as open source goes?
So there's always that kind of dilemma about how do you build a business model around open source software. And for Aqua at least, I think we're seeing open source as a really good way to provide useful tools that enable us to have a discussion and, you know, with an enterprise and learn more about their requirements. We don't put everything, you know, there's lots of technology that I think your team are going to be demoing later on that we don't open source. You know, we need to pay ourselves some wages some of the time. But there's also lots of things, particularly around these kind of published best practices. One of the tools that I work on is called KubeBench, and it's an implementation of the CIS security guidance for benchmark for Kubernetes. And it's not a massive project. The greatest part of the work is really in kind of transferring the 200 odd pages of spec into tests, and we define those tests in YAML, not JSON. And that just makes that feasible to run. You know, you don't want to do 200 pages of tests manually. Really important to automate it, and you can take that open source project and run it yourself, or you can get the results sort of, you know, in a nice UI inside our commercial product. So there's a nice kind of relationship between the open source parts and the commercial product.
Okay. Yeah, and I think you'll see some of it's a pipeline discussion. So we're going to kind of switch gears and talk just a bit about DevOps and how it means so many different things. And I think this context could be more of a DevSecOps like a discussion, bringing those teams together. Which, you know, all this is driven by buzzwords like digital transformation, and I mean that's how we're getting budget to build teams. And you know, I won't lie, we go along with it sometimes if it pushes a project along, right? If someone needs to check the DevOps box.
Anybody here doing a digital transformation? Yeah, I say.
You get the half hand raise. It's the best. So and then. We talk about this sometimes. One of Kelsey's quotes actually, it's like group therapy for developers and sysadmins, right? Is what DevOps can kind of be. So what are you seeing that's working? I'm sure you're brought into a lot of big customers and you're meeting with these teams and they're on their digital transformation road. And what are you seeing as the success criteria or the main use cases that they're asking for you to come in and provide thought leadership and push them along? They're usually looking for opinions, and that's probably why you've been flown into the city. What are you seeing that makes them successful, or the things that they're falling down on that aren't making them successful?
I think it's really important. almost feels trite to say this, but it's important for the teams to communicate. You know, we talk about DevSecOps. You know, we've merged it into one word for some kind of metaphor for people actually talking to each other, and I think that is really important. People recognizing that if the goal of this is to ship business functionality more quickly, then it requires automation, but you have to have agreement about what that automation is going to be, and you can only get that agreement by having, you know, the security team in the same room as the development people and the operations people to talk about things like, what's your policy going to be on whether you let people run as root, or are you going to define some base container images that you require people to use? So, you know, maybe everybody who's writing in Python has to start from a particular base image, and you have to have an agreement and discussion about what that's going to be. Yeah, so the communication thing is really important. I think the other thing that I'll say is a real improvement, and I sort of almost feel kind of silly saying this from like with my Kubernetes hat on. But a year ago, a lot of companies were stuck in a bit of paralysis about, well, do I pick, which orchestrator do I pick, which platform do I pick? You know, should I be using Docker Swarm, for example? And, you know, fast forward to today, and the consensus really seems to be towards Kubernetes, unless you've got a particularly strong reason to use something else. And that's enabled that conversation to go much more quickly, because there are a lot of companies getting into a bit of a circular argument with themselves about, but if we adopt this, then we can't do that, and how do we bring this into using that? So that's great progress.
So start, right? Get started is one
pick
thing.
something, and why not pick the thing that's got all the momentum?
So not to bring it back a bit, but what do you think that was that caused, so we went through this movement of Docker, and you went to the conferences and the lineups were massive, and you're like, I guess this Docker thing is something. What was it that really brought Kubernetes to be that de facto standard? Being an open source project, Google obviously had a lot to do with that. But do you think, back to the CNCF question, is it the CNCF one? Because it was the first graduate project from that. It set like enormous momentum. Prometheus is now graduated. So I think we're going to see a ton of graduation projects come December in Seattle. So what was the catalyst that really made that win? Because it was not a commercial product.
Yeah, I think Google did a pretty good job of recognizing that to get adoption and to get the community together. They needed to have somebody else own the intellectual property and have some kind of independent body, and that's what the foundation is there for, right? It's to be a sort of neutral ground, so that it's not just Google and everybody looking at Google and looking cynically about why they're adding bits of features, because I think that kind of happened to Docker, that people, you know, and they also had that problem where there was Docker the company and Docker the open source project, and they tried to clarify that now with Moby, but that confusion was, well, created confusion, and I think the way that Kubernetes has been handed over to that community, not without, you know, flaws, and not without, you know, there's always a little bit of politics in these things, but it made it easier for lots of people to get involved. You know, there's hundreds of people from various different vendors, and, you know, the Googles, the Microsofts, the Red Hats. You know, there's a huge amount of people from Red Hat now working on Kubernetes, and that's a lot of talented people building some pretty complicated code in the open. I think that having that level of talent concentrating on one thing, you know, it's a good product.
Yeah, I think it gives people a lot of like trust just in this spreading out that IP and trust across many people, and not just relying on one organization. We've seen what's happened over the last 20 years.
And it's not like we've kind of solved that, in that now people are going, but it's all Google and Red Hat. I mean, it's not. There's other companies, but they dominate in terms of the number of SIG leads and the number of contributors. So but I think that's one of the reasons to engage with things like the end user community, because at the end of the day, it's supposed to be used by customers, and having the perception that the foundation is doing the right thing for the end users, not just for the current big sponsors.
Right. And for everyone that she mentioned, SIGs. So SIGs are special interest groups that are set up around these open source programs. You're welcome to get on them. They'll run like a Google Hangout or Meet. You can get on and get involved and hear what they're, probably go on and listen for a while. And they're going to talk about features. They're going to debate things. So it's really an open way for people to come and learn.
They have amazing Slack channels. Like every SIG has a Slack channel, and you can just go in there and ask a question, and a lot of them, the people who wrote the code about that feature are there and prepared to answer really quite detailed questions, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, so if you don't get enough push notifications during the day, join some Slack channels and you'll feel special again. So let's switch gears and talk about 12-factor apps. So obviously I see a lot of this, just Kubernetes in general. We said, why did it grow so fast? Was really about microservices and breaking up our applications. This term cloud native people here and 12-factor apps. For the people that don't really understand the difference between like a monolith and a 12-factor app, what would you say are the kind of core tenets of what they are, why they're that way, what they really do for the business, and how people can get into them and start to learn about them? That's a bunch of things, and you can switch the order anytime you want.
For a second, I thought you were going to ask me what the 12 factors were, and I'll be like, oh.
We won't fact check you now.
So the idea of either breaking up your monolith or, ideally you're in a greenfields environment and you can start from scratch, which is lovely. But the idea that you can take your code and break it into self-contained pieces that ideally have one job. That piece can do that one job well and can be scaled independently and can be worked on independently. And maybe you have these different components and each component has its own team so that they can, the API between those teams becomes really important, but they can work on those components independently without kind of constantly having to be sort of waiting for, it's never as clean as that, right? Because you're always, there's an API and there's a dependency on what another team has done. But ideally, a lot of the time, that work can be self-contained. We're all agile, we're all shipping features as quickly as possible in those self-contained pieces rather than having to coordinate across a huge organization to ship one big monolith together. Think about those sort of I remember working on big projects where they talked about release trains because you had to line up all the carriages, and now you don't have to synchronize quite as that synchronized problem is nowhere near as significant.
So some of these things are obvious, but do you think there's a big contrast to the advantages of going 12-factor for a greenfield startup who's building, a SaaS service versus an enterprise who's trying to move faster? If you look at financial industries and stuff, they're getting more pressure from smaller companies when this wasn't even a possibility before, and now someone can come up with an innovative feature, capture the market's attention of a new group of millennials or something like that, and then they really disrupt the space. So with that and all the process that enterprises have, is going 12-factor a really hard requirement? Obviously it helps them release things faster, but also how does it affect the compliance pressure that they're under and all of that?
So Docker have that big program about modernizing traditional apps, and I think that's kind of, which is the idea that you take your monolith and recognizing that maybe one day you want to break it into microservices, but that actually that's there's going to be a lot of work to do that. There's a lot of engineering in that breaking up existing code. But maybe you can get some of the benefits of a cloud native approach by taking your monolith and containerizing it. And I don't know if you see sort of that kind of experience. I think it allows people to at least get the benefits of moving into the cloud and starting to use some of the kind of supporting pieces around the edges without having to have done, they didn't have to convert their entire application into, sort of microservices. But meanwhile, I think a lot of people are saying, well, we have this monolith, but actually we want to experiment with some small greenfields project to start with and then learn from that and take that learning into our main production, whatever it is what we're known for.
Yeah.
Does that reflect your?
I think so. We see people a lot of time trying to pick a part of the application that is going to value from great change and speed.
Yeah.
So they'll find a way to containerize it, and with that, plug in a simple pipeline. It's interesting. We're seeing like that was like get the pipeline working, which means pull the container, push the code to it, get it a service in front, make it like available. And then there was such a rush to do that, and now we're talking about container security. So one of the things that kind of leads into the next topic, but one of the things we try to focus on is integrated security. And back when we first started at Arctiq, it was a lot about like making virtual machines like the image hardened and making sure the policies and stuff, which is not that much different from providing a standard container image.
Yeah.
But runtime is much different. So it's interesting that we've gone to the rush of microservices and containers, and we didn't really understand security, probably because a lot of the teams didn't talk. So we opened up certain vulnerabilities, and now it's enlightening that we're having the conversation now, which is good. Which I think it comes into this story around pipeline automation. And get a pipeline and then plug in a security. So that's some of the stuff I know the team's going to demo this afternoon. And getting that human element out of it, of having to look every Friday or look at a compliance report or do a manual audit, is really how we accelerate security in this world, I think. And it requires the developers to have a different mindset also. So I think we'll talk about the development side of this. But to spin things into like container security and secret management, so I talked about like we kind of look at this as integrated security. So if we're going to re-platform an app, we better be thinking about how we manage our secrets, how we're going to manage access, and educating people on, we're going to respin your containers when we patch the environment or something happens. So the culture behind that, what do you think we can do better to make that easier for people? Because it is a pretty big change of what they're used to.
Yeah, so I sometimes do sort of have a presentation that I've done a few times about secrets management in containers. And the first couple of times I did it, I almost glossed over the idea that people, you shouldn't be putting your credentials into GitHub, and you shouldn't be putting your credentials, baking them into container images. And I'd see people, I'd mention it in passing, and I'd see people kind of going, oh, we shouldn't be putting our passwords in GitHub. So actually people are, it's pretty easy to be doing things that actually, when you step back and think about it, are pretty obviously not a great idea. I mean, you think, oh, but it's a private GitHub repository. Why does it matter if my credentials are in there? And actually kind of stepping back and thinking about the risks and the implications for things like secret rotation. It's maybe not best practices, but there's loads of things that we can make much more secure by just small incremental changes, like not putting our credentials into Git.
And what I don't see a lot early is setting standards for teams. So development teams are moving fast. Sometimes they're working around the core infrastructure teams. They have a credit card, so they have a cloud, they're using Azure or something like that. Who do you think should be controlling those standards and going out? It also goes back to your comments around the DevOps side of let's talk. People aren't going to talk unless there's a champion who's kind of like bringing people together, right? The therapist or whoever's going to go around.
True.
So with that comment, who do you feel needs to, like, what part of the organization needs to champion this and not just set standards and say, thou shalt follow these, but also go educate and drive the conversations, help people understand why? Because if they don't know, they're not going to want to do it.
Yeah, I think we see that kind of champion coming from different roles depending on the organization. So sometimes it's going to be more from the developer side, because they're basically saying, look, we're using containers in development and we want to figure out how we can take advantage of it in production, and I recognize that one of the things I need to do is get the security team on board, because we want to move away from the process of raising a JIRA ticket every time we want to open a port. And that's sort of one angle that people come from. Or another angle is from the security side, when people say, well, I keep hearing about this container thing, this Kubernetes thing, this cloud native thing, and I need to understand what that means from a security perspective. So it can come from either of those directions, but I think you're absolutely right that somebody has to kind of kickstart that conversation. And maybe when it doesn't work, it's when one end of that conversation, typically the developer side, kind of, does a whole load of things and then finally tries to engage with the security team and say, this is what we need you to do. And the security team is like, wait a minute, whoa, you want to ship, you want me to run like 10,000 containers and I don't know where they are, I don't get to control what server they're on? You want me to put code that I can't patch? It's a mindset change that automation can really help with, and people need to have the time and the education around how that's going to work and how that's going to improve their security situation, not people saying I want to run 100 different container images is not necessarily saying and I need you to do a whole bunch more work.
So it doesn't sound like there's one particular person, so it sounds like a big opportunity for people inside organizations that are willing to make some friends and have some conversations and get up to speed on the tech to really grow their careers, because it's not really one person that's out there doing this stuff.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Istio a little bit and service mesh and discoveries. It seems to be one of the latest hot topics. The lines are long at the conferences. Just what do you see in the power of Istio? I see it, there's people that say, wow, this would really help my QA department as far as the tracing side. Security, this opens up great opportunities on the security, but then there's different approaches. We see some platforms are using daemon sets. Istio seems to be a sidecar strategy. Do you have any thoughts on what you see Istio doing? And it's also, a very powerful open source project, so that's going to obviously just give it traction, integration possibilities. We have console, we talk about console a lot, so there's overlap there.
Yeah, Istio is, in many ways, it's a bit too much of a Swiss Army knife, in my opinion, because it's enabling loads of really powerful features. So, like, for example, automatically setting up mutual TLS between pairs of services, which is great, and there are other ways you can do that, Aqua, for example, but it's a good solution for that. Docker Swarm had mutual TLS between services out of the box. It's a nice thing to have, but Istio also gives you things like canary testing rollout, and that's really powerful. But what if you didn't want that and you just wanted the I slightly fear that it's too many things all in one place, but I've not used it in production, so I will defer to other people who've had actual experience of running it, but just my kind of gut feel is that's doing an awful lot of different things, and maybe kind of breaking things into separate sidecar containers so that you can switch things in and out as you need them would be useful.
Yeah, it's probably a maturity thing. I mean, people argued Kubernetes was way too complex in the early days.
And then we see things getting pulled out of the core. You can look at this set of things that we've kind of evaluated in some ways. And it's not like a certification scheme, but projects do have to go through this kind of process of review by the technical oversight committee, who decide whether or not a project can come into the CNCF or not, and what level it can come into. And when you get a project that's graduated, you've got something that is being used in production by a lot of people, and it's got good open source governance in place, so you know that it's going to be there for a while. It's not like because you have an open source project with one maintainer, you don't know what's going to happen if that maintainer gets hit by a bus, right? So a graduated project is not in that. We de-risk that. So I think that's one of the roles that the CNCF can play. So I've said that, and then you go and look at the CNCF landscape with like 1 million different logos in it and go, wait a minute, how curated is that? So there's a balance there. But there's still functionality that isn't, there are gaps in the CNCF landscape that are, you might have to write your own bit of code to do a thing if a project doesn't fulfill that already. But equally, you don't want to have that landscape turning into or even more, 1 pixel per icon.
Yeah. So a couple more questions, then we'll get some lunch. I see the food's coming out. And it goes along with your comment around, I see this with a lot of our partners and open source projects and stuff. We try to go to customers and we try to describe this new world and how to solve problems. And some people walk in with here's all our products. And so if you did that in a CNCF, you'd be like, wow, that's daunting. Aqua's got a bunch of different products. So how do you find the most effective way to help your customers understand the value of Aqua is? What business challenges, like top 3 business challenges, if you were coming into a customer, or the elevator pitch of, what can you do for my organization without the tech side of it?
Yeah, it's actually kind of quite hot because we provide a platform, and I'm not a salesperson, I'm a technical person.
That's why I asked you the question.
I need to talk about all the things. But what I kind of have recognised from the people who are more, sales-oriented and better at understanding how to provide things is that people often have one problem that they're trying to solve, and then there are a whole bunch of other capabilities that go, oh, that's really useful. So often the key thing, and it's key because it's the source of most exploits, is you want to know that you're not shipping vulnerable code. You want to not have shell shock in the images that you're deploying. And you do that with vulnerability scanning. So quite early in your container security journey, you go, I need some of that vulnerability scanning thing. And that's part of what we provide. So that's often the first conversation we have. But then you go, but okay, so I've got an image that we believe is vulnerability free, but how do you know whether that's what's actually being deployed? How do you know that somebody hasn't maliciously got in the middle and replaced your image with something else, or maybe just inadvertently a developer pulled something down from the internet? So you start talking about image policies and how we can prevent unauthorized images, if you like, from, I don't mean unauthorized in a authorization sense, but unapproved images, bad images, from being run. And then you get into the okay, now they're running, it would be really awesome if we could make sure they're only doing what they're expected to do, and that's where the runtime protection comes in. When I first kind of met the Aqua team and was seeing the product, it was the runtime stuff that I went, well, that's really clever, because we're basically able to say, this container, based on this image, should only be able to do certain things. Take an example of Nginx. Take the Nginx container, or the image, and it's got, I can't remember which Linux distribution, but it's got a whole bunch of executables inside it, but you only ever run the Nginx executable. So we put a profile on it that says, only run Nginx. Anything outside of that is, might not be an attack, but it's unexpected, and maybe it's a sign of an attack. So that's the kind of thing that we'll police. And I saw that and I was like, that's
So limit your
brilliant.
exposure. Why not limit your exposure? There's no reason not to a certain extent.
Right, and that becomes easier to do in terms of things like the executables and the user IDs and the network traffic. If you've got coming back to the thing about 12-factor apps, if you've got microservices that do one thing and one thing well, it becomes pretty easy to start reasoning about what kind of the expected behavior looks like. Even in error paths, it's only expected to do a certain set of things.
Okay, so 2 more questions, and then if anyone has any, get them ready. We'll field some from the audience. So this one, I think I kind of put a note around this, around Liz's life advice. So these aren't that deep. But I saw a talk. I was at a DevOps Toronto event that was run by a bank a couple weeks ago. There's an enormous amount of people there, and someone spoke, and his talk wasn't very technical. Well, it wasn't technical at all, but it was about. It was an evening, and how everybody was here, away from their jobs, here to learn. And he was talking about the if you look at what's happening in IT tech-wise today compared to the Industrial Revolution, we're at that change, but the pace that it's happening at is just there's been nothing like this that we've ever gone through, and the requirements it puts on people in the IT industry and the learning side of that. You just can't go to work and work your day and go home and wait the next day. So it requires a different type of mindset if you're going to work in tech. And you still have to balance your life and all these other things. So I'm sure you're in that mindset all the time of how do I keep on top of all this, because people have a certain expectation that I should know if I'm coming places and doing talks and speaking at conferences. So how do you balance that, and are there any resources you'd recommend for people to, younger people that are coming into the industry, and how do they manage that? They've never had to do it before.
Yeah, personally I have a secret weapon on this front, which is that my husband is also in tech, and he is constantly wandering around the house watching videos, and I hear little bits and I go, was that any good? Yeah, should I watch that one? So he's like my editor for things I should watch. It's super important for people to not feel like they have to know everything about everything, because nobody can, and we all have to recognise, it's not all about tech at the end of the day. We've got lives to lead. I have a incredibly privileged position where I get to go and talk about interesting technology things and meet interesting people, and that's amazing. And I spend a lot of time away from home, and I have to recognise that I can't do that forever, and I can't say yes to everything. And that's my own challenge, is just saying, I can't do it all. And I think, we all have those kind of tensions where we just sort of have to start saying, I can't do it all, just say no. Yeah.
So do you have any advice for yourself if you were given it when you were starting out in tech? Anything you'd go back and say, I wish I knew this, or I would have done it differently? It sounds like you're happy with your career and stuff, but is there anything that comes to mind? It's a deep question.
Yeah, I spent a few years working on startups that ended up not going anywhere, and I wish I had recognised that. I personally really enjoy the technical stuff, and I really enjoy the kind of education, teaching, kind of helping myself understand things and hopefully conveying that to other people. And I wish I had recognised earlier on that I do not care about the money side of things, and I find that uncomfortable. I spent a few years trying to make myself do that, and I'm so much happier now I don't do it. So if you want to talk about money things, somebody else.
I think the message there is be yourself.
Yeah.
Do what makes you
Find
happy.
the things that you enjoy that you're good at and just do those. Not everybody, there's that whole thing of the career ladder, and whether you have to manage people in order to progress your career. And I don't know what, not all organisations have a really good ladder for people who don't want to manage people, but I don't think you should have to manage people in order to feel successful. And if that isn't true in your organisation, find a different organisation. And particularly in the world of technology, in the world of technology, we all have knowledge and skills that are hugely in demand, and it's very easy to end up feeling imposter syndrome or a lack of confidence. A lot of us as engineers, quite often lacking in confidence. And actually, those skills people are desperate for them. So we should make ourselves go and if we're not happy, recognise that and find something that suits us better.
So that'll be our next talk. I think that could be a talk in its own. That term of imposter syndrome, I've just heard it since I've actually started Arctiq. We've heard it, we've talked to our teams about it, and it's super interesting, and I think dialogue is one way to solve that, but it's there's something there, and it goes back to this whole movement of everything changing so fast, and we're being asked to be consultants and opinionated and come in, and we're supposed to be experts. We'll never be experts in everything, but you got to be confident that you know what you're doing, or you're willing to solve the right problem. So any questions anybody had that came to mind? You want to now's your chance. No, we must have did a good job. Victor's got one. He might have that tough question we talked to you about earlier.
This is a little bit technical, but I'm curious to know your opinion about how you see technologies like Aqua and Istio playing together in Kubernetes, because they're both kind of doing similar things, but they're also not only just doing similar things, but they do it in a similar way. How they map traffic, like tables and that sort of thing. So how are these, like specifically, you can just use Aqua and Istio as the example. How are they going to play in the Kubernetes space together?
Yeah, there are things where there are open source solutions for bits of functionality that we do, and in some cases, I think the open source solution is going to be the better way to go. It depends what your requirement is, and as a commercial organisation, we need to make our solutions compatible with these things to the extent that they need to work together. If somebody's going to use Istio for, maybe the service, mutual TLS, and maybe they want to have the Canary rollout, which we're never going to do. That's never going to be part of what we do at Aqua, because it's nothing to do with security. I don't run the roadmap, but I'm pretty confident we're never going to do Canary rollouts. And we need to find a way to be able to provide things like runtime protection, so that if you don't want to use our network firewalling, there are reasons why you might, because, for example, Istio it can only protect traffic where you've got the sidecar container in that pod. Whereas if we are enforcing at a host level, we can make sure that there aren't any pods running that don't have Istio in it, for example. So they're kind of complementary, and it's our responsibility to make sure that we can work in conjunction with those things.
So they are at a high level complementary, but at the low level they're doing the same thing.
Yeah, I know there's some work going on, and I don't know exactly where it is about specifically the IP tables management thing. There's details there that I know of being looked at.
We're getting some exposure to that now, so it's really interesting to see.
Okay.
What we're into.
Yeah.
Look for a blog from Victor.
Okay.
All right, so
A couple more questions. What are the top 3 challenges Aqua's facing, like technical challenges, and how are they trying to address that?
Technical challenges that we're facing. Interesting. One thing that I think is interesting coming down the road is different runtimes, and we now have, for years, pretty much everybody used the Docker runtime, which is now runC, and
Cryo.
We basically listen on the Docker socket, and now we have the container runtime interface that so we kind of have ways of working with that. So there was a really great little series of tweets by Phil Estes, who works for IBM and who works on runC and Containerd, and he's really involved in this. And he did this tweet that says, it's like a play in 3 acts, and the first act is people saying, we want to get rid of the Docker runtime, and we want something, we want a better interface. And act 2 is, here's like CRI and this nice gRPC interface. And act 3 is, the crowd coming back and going, where's my Docker socket gone? All my tools rely on the Docker socket. So,
Careful what you wish for.
Yeah. Which took me completely away from the other 2. What are the next 2? I don't know if it's a technical challenge so much, but a product challenge is making sure that our product dovetails neatly with the other projects. So we started off as and we still are, agnostic to the orchestrator, but the practicality is that almost all our customers are now Kubernetes users. We do have some others who are using Docker or who are using Mesos Marathon, but the more we see people doing things in a Kubernetes world, the more we need to reflect kind of concepts. It's no longer enough for us to just say everything's about containers, because for people using Kubernetes, it's about pods and services and nodes and what have you. So getting those to dovetail is definitely something we're working on. I can't think of a third. That's spoke on.
Those are enough challenges. Great, go ahead.
Just so in looking at the sort of security vendor landscape, it gets pretty wide now, and it wasn't that way 2 years ago.
Yeah.
By vendor, I mean project or product. There's a wide varying degree of the way some of the challenges are being solved. And I'm curious, one of the bigger questions we have in the open source world is, do you see open standards emerging around the security side that's different than like OpenSCAP and things like that, that are actually, that we can ask the vendors, are you adhering to the standard so that I know I can extend in a certain way, or is everybody still kind of doing a bit of a free-for-all? And that could be an Aqua question or just a general open standard question.
Kind of a bit of a mix in that, like how we solve things. I don't think there's any standardization around that at all. But we do see things like that, CIS benchmark, which I don't know whether that really counts as open, but it's certainly kind of community-based standards. And it has become a real thing. And we hear from our partners as well, that people are coming and saying, how do I tick the CIS benchmark box as part of my compliance? And I don't know, it's not like there's legislation that says it's not like GDPR or PCI, but somehow the community wrote a spec and everybody wants to tick a box to say they adhere to that spec. So I think probably we'll see. Actually, the other thing kind of related to that is something I'm involved with in the CNCF, which is it's a proposed working group called SAFE, which is really about having sort of standard security approaches and helping people assess their security across all the different cloud native projects. So it's still pretty nascent discussion, but I think that output from that, in my mind, should help people understand whether they are compliant to things like PCI and whatever FedRAMP, whatever standards, and making it easier for people to understand which of the projects they can plug together to achieve that.
Yeah, that's actually exactly where I was heading. It's the risk we see a lot of the time is what somebody's doing might be very cool and great, but if it just stays at almost like a small project, right? If it stays where it is and there's no standards that we're trying to work with the community within, I'm at risk. The business of it being kind of unknown, unsupportable, and also it might be odd and it might want to extend my functionality and be blocked from doing so.
Yeah, and in my view, we've seen a lot of, Kubernetes itself, for years, a long time, didn't have very good secure by default settings. And now the admin tools are like kubeadm particularly, tending to install things with better sets of defaults. But I don't know if that's true for all the other projects, and who knows, that maybe they're all got, open, unencrypted endpoints. And somebody kind of ought to go through and say, you really should make sure this is, has a sort of secure connections only setting, that kind of thing. So that everybody, like end users, don't have to go and check that for each individual project.
And that's kind of where you're heading with QBench as well. Is it's supposed to be the interrogation as well on that project in terms of?
Right. Okay. So QBench, the intention with QBench. So QBench is a tool that checks your running Kubernetes settings. So we look at the actual processes that are running and we see how they were configured. So whether they were set to allow privileged containers or allow anonymous authentication. And the tests we're running match the CIS benchmark recommendations. But then we also have Kube Hunter, which I'm really excited about. It does kind of pen testing. So where the benchmark is saying some people kind of virtually sat in a room and figured that these would be sensible things to set, Kube Hunter says, if I try to send a message to this particular port or get data from that particular port, will I get something? Is there an Open API dashboard, an Open API server, or an Open Kubernetes dashboard? And we're actually kind of penetration testing for that. They're sort of testing the same thing in that if we found an Open API server, the fix is to change the setting, and that setting is as recommended by the benchmark, but they're coming at it from different angles. And the Kube Hunter, I think, is really exciting because basically people can unleash their inner hacker and come up with new tests and add them to the project, which would be awesome.
Cool. Well, I think it's time for lunch. Oh,
There's one more.
Jamie.
I changed my mind, I don't want to get in the way of lunch.
We'll have ask it over lunch. Anyway,
Yeah, ask me over
thanks for coming into town and your thought leadership and sharing everything.